Hello and welcome to Games from Folktales, a podcast that mixes historical research and tabletop role-playing settings. I'm your host, Timothy Ferguson. This week, the origins of Hermetic magic. Before we kick off, a quick shout out to the Fixer on the Ars Magica forum, who gave me the idea for this podcast. In the Ars Magica setting, we know where magic comes from originally. When the Nephilim fall, they have children with humans, and they taught the humans useful arts. These include war and blacksmithing and agriculture, but they also include magic. God drowns all of the children of the Nephilim in Noah's flood, although rumours and folklore persist that one of the wives on board the ark had the tainted blood of the Nephilim, and magic continued through her. Assuming that magic died out in the flood, how was it reignited in the civilizations that rose from Noah's sons? According to research done by one of the early primi of House Bonasagus, the ancestor of Hermetic magic reappears in the kingdom of Noah's grandson Mizraim, which is now called Egypt. Some early Christian writers claimed that the monuments of Egypt were created by the people before the flood, and the land was simply resettled by Noah's descendants. In this case, they relearned magic from the written records on those monuments. The people who live in Egypt in 1220 do not believe this is correct. The Muslim view is that the vast and slightly ridiculous overabundance of monuments in Egypt occurs because Allah wants it to be that way. This encourages humans to go to Egypt and view them, which encourages spiritual development and also encourages them to head a little bit further on and go to Mecca. Saying that there are too many monuments in Egypt is kind of like looking at the Atlantic and saying, that seems like an unnecessary and unlikely amount of water over there, God. It's a failure to deal with reality as it was created. By the time of magic's recurrence, people had fallen away from the God who would later rescue the Jews from the Egyptians, and they worshipped other deities. Most of these were, in Ars Magica terms, potent fairies. The priesthoods were aligned to the fairy realm, but were served by a caste of magicians who created practical enchanted devices. These may have used religious symbolism or religious invocations, but were not fundamentally devotional in their form, much as the folk charms of medieval peasants may include the names of saints, but do not actually evoke those saints. The earliest magician we have clear evidence for is Imhotep, who is said to have invented many of the basic elements of architecture and to have codified medicine. He also built the first pyramid. He was probably the first Akh, the embodied immortals described in Lands of the Nile. Subsequent Aku are active in mythic Europe, often acting as generals for the Black in its war with the Red. The tomb of Imhotep has never been found. He might be off anywhere, and he's had at least 2 millennia to set up his places of power. A later follower of Thoth is mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts. It's called Gods Can't See You in Mythic Europe, and it talks about the Book of Thoth and an Egyptian prince who found the book. I'll leave that there and continue with the great sweep of Hermetic history. I suggest the point at which the magicians in Egypt switch over so that practical magic becomes more politically significant than devotional magic occurs when the Ptolemies arrive. The Ptolemies were descendants of Ptolemy, a general of Alexander the Great, who, when Alexander's empire collapsed, seized Alexander's body and Egypt, the richest of his provinces. The Ptolemies were not directly tied to the old cults. They primarily venerated Serapis, who was a familial divinity. The first high priest of this new god might have been Mantheo, some of whose writing exists in the real world to the modern day. At this point, Ptolemy I founded the Great Library of Alexandria. The first librarian was Demetrius of Phalerum. Phalerum is a port city of Athens, who was a student of Aristotle. The librarians who followed were often astronomers of great skill. Cleopatra VII, effectively the last Ptolemy, was reputed a great sorceress and alchemist. Her daughter, Cleopatra Selene, was raised in Rome and sent to rule Mauritania, which is the area of modern Algeria. and she had a court there with Egyptian, Hellenic, and Roman magicians. The Roman history of the cult of Mercury, which is the ancestral tradition from which the order derives, is described in the second edition book, Order of Hermes. Parts of it don't congeal into a single narrative. Before I go into it, I'd like to briefly mention that the transition from the cult of Mercury to the Order of Hermes is also mentioned in The Mythic Seas, a book that had serious production issues, which is why the author didn't put their name on the front. It has a plot hook in which some members of the Order of Hermes discover that the order is not descended from the cult of Mercury, that they drove the cult of Mercury to extinction. And so the Yarburton, who is a member of that group, suggests that the order be dissolved, and the local Flambeau think that's a lovely idea because they'd like to go back to the war of all against all. Personally, I just ignore that plot hook. It doesn't seem like a coherent thing for the Yarburton to wish for. Even if you suddenly discovered that the history of the order is not what you think it was, the idea of calling the whole thing off and starting from scratch seems kind of ridiculous. But back to Order of Hermes. It says that the order is descended from the cult of Mercury, and this was founded by the Romans after they borrowed Hermes from the Greeks as they were growing their empire. The cult of Mercury was never one of the most powerful priesthoods, but their rituals helped keep the empire together. In the 2nd century BC, Plentarch of the Mercurian Temple of Pompeii codified the 38 rituals of the cult, but these rituals have been lost. Individual rituals are, in earlier books, described as being from this group of 38. The cult declined with the rise of Christianity and was effectively mummery by 300 AD. When Constantine made Christianity the state religion, the remaining magi moved out of the cities, and the cult fell, with Rome's loss to the barbarians. This is poor historiography. Then again, it was written before Google, so we should be forgiving. The Roman Empire begins, depending on your views, in 27 BCE. That's hundreds of years after Plentarch. Let's assume they meant the Republic. Mercury turns up in the Roman pantheon in the 4th century BCE, so Plentarch might be an early leader. Note that Pompeii is not part of the Republic at this stage. It's a sort of tributary state. It was annexed by the Republic in 89 BC. Constantine doesn't make Christianity the state religion, he just makes it legal to be Christian in 313 AD. It becomes the state religion in 380 AD. The empire had reached its maximum size geographically in 117 AD, and Rome was sacked in 409 AD. The timeline just doesn't seem to work. There's further detail of the decline in the 2nd edition Iberia book, but in it the cult falls because of an insistence among the Magi that new recruits have pure Roman blood. This is an idea which speaks strongly to a modern audience but isn't culturally congruent in the Roman context. This may be due to the line style at the time, which can be summed up by pointing out that the book's theme was corruption and that there were demons under every rock. Order of Hermes also suggests that there was once a civilization of magical creatures living in the hollow of the Mediterranean basin. One of their number destroyed the dam across the Pillars of Hercules, flooding their lands. Survivors became the gods of Egypt and Greece, or the dragons, but faded from reality due to boredom. Humans were their servants. The destroyer was Thoth, who does this because he's ugly and jealous and can't get laid. I recall at the time, when I read this at university, thinking it was similar to the destruction of the Tenu in Julian May's The Golden Talk. We can do better than this now with our more modern research tools. We can do better with Atlantis, with Thoth, with Heka, the Egyptian god of magic, with the goddess who taught humans magic, Thoth's wife, Sheshet, the Lady of the Libraries. I'm happy that this be a theory among the seekers, but with our modern tools, we can do so much better. How did magical ideas make the leap from these Romans to the modern order? There are many possibilities. When we think about Trionoma and the witches of Thessaly, we often consider the spooky things which occur in the Golden Ass. We are interested in their necromancies. I can never pronounce the name of the main Thessalian witch that performs these necromancies. It's something like Erikotho. If you're a Greek speaker, write in. I'd like to flag that we might instead consider them as descendants of Aglaia Nike, who was an ancient Greek astronomer. If she is descended from the Alexandrians, and that's entirely possible because the Egyptians had Cyprus as a colony right up until the time of Cleopatra VII. Egyptian thought permeated the Eastern Mediterranean. Then Trionoma might be a descendant of hers, and that would act as a vector to get their ideas into the order. More directly, Mercere, the magus who worked with stones and travel, seems likely to be descended from the pontifexes of ancient Rome. Their name literally means bridge builders. The highest magical office in ancient Rome, the Pontifex Maximus, a title which is later taken by the Pope, means master of the bridge builders. The flambeau had a strong Mercurian tradition. It was a major component of their practice. It doesn't seem to have been a major component of the practice of the founder himself, however. That section of the house was all but destroyed during the Tempest, the final battle of the Schism War, and so they don't show up when we're describing the order in 1220, but their practices may have had much greater weight in the early order, where they basically provide the military strength that keeps the order together. In Houses of Hermes' True Lineages, Matt Ryan tidies a lot of this up. Bonosagus is born in Florence in 890 and is apprenticed by a wandering conjurer. He goes to all kinds of interesting places, sees people performing various types of magic. He sees Assyrian magicians. He finds a cache of Mercurian rituals in a well. There's no direct descent here in any real sense. Bonosagus is doing something entirely novel, using materials that he has researched. He is the great secularizer of magic. The various possibilities presented here work better or worse with different styles of saga. Of them all, in a plain vanilla saga, I like Matt's the best. It works far better with our later designs for how the magic realm and how the fairy realm operate. Once again, thanks to the Fixer for the idea of this episode. If you have any ideas for episodes, please comment on the blog or in the Ars Magica forum.